On behalf of INSA Chairman Ambassador John Negroponte and the INSA Board of Directors, thank you for joining us tonight. We have a good turnout this evening, and it means a lot to all of us. It's a tremendous turnout. We have more than 400 in attendance, closer to 500, with over 100 government employees joining us. Welcome to all of you. Although August can be slow in Washington, interest in this leadership dinner has been terrific from the day we announced it just a few weeks ago. No doubt it's because we have a great speaker who's heading a great agency. I want to express my appreciation to Admiral Rogers and his staff for their efforts to ensure that he could be here with us this evening. Admiral Rogers, it's an honor to host you this evening. Thank you for being with us, sir. You are a great American whose leadership of the U.S. Cyber Command, the NSA, and the Central Security Service greatly benefits the intelligence community and our national security. You head a great agency doing critically important work to protect the homeland. I and many in this room have worked with the NSA over the years, always impressed with the professionalism, selflessness, and brilliance of their work. Admiral Rogers, we look forward to hearing from you this evening. A warm welcome also for the leader of our intelligence community, Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper. Jim. Jim, thank you for joining us tonight and for your long-standing leadership of the intelligence community and your support of INSA. It means a lot to INSA, but indeed it means a lot to this country. Thank you. Very briefly, I'd like to recognize tonight's Patriot sponsor, Lockheed Martin, for their support of INSA and their leadership dinner. Thank you also to tonight's registration sponsor, Nobles NSP, welcome reception sponsor, Northrop Grumman, and board sponsor, PwC, for their contributions to tonight's events. Thank you all. That means a great deal to us. They are tremendous partners, as are tonight's Eagle sponsors, CSC, Oracle, and Vencor, which recently formed from two long-time INSA supporters, the SI organization and Kinetic. Congratulations on your new venture. I'd also like to thank our Liberty sponsors, BAE Systems, Booz Allen Hamilton, Eagle Ray, General Dynamics Advanced Information Systems, Microsoft, TASC, and USIS. Thanks also to the many corporate members who purchased the table tonight. And is this type, there you go. Honestly, it's this type of active support and participation from our corporate members that permits INSA to host events of this type and to publish unclassified white papers dealing with national security issues. So thank you to all of you. Please join me in acknowledging our sponsors for one last round of applause. This is a special evening tonight. We have a special speaker who's leading a special organization. It's time for me to step aside and introduce a personal friend and a great friend of INSA, Tim Reardon. Tim is the President of Defense and Intelligence Solutions at Lockheed Martin, and since 2012, he has served on the INSA Board of Directors. Tim's contributions to the board have helped ensure that INSA is best positioned to assist the national security community today and in the future. His insight and guidance have been so very helpful to me personally and to the Board of Directors, and certainly to our chairman, Ambassador John Negroponte. It's my pleasure to welcome him to the stage to introduce Admiral Rogers. Tim, please, all yours.
How we communicate with each other, share a picture, buy a book, file our taxes. This transformative technology has spawned the incredible waves of innovation and entrepreneurship However, it has also given rise to new dangers. These perils represent a significant challenge for both business and government and will test us going forward. The consequences of cyber incidents are extremely serious. When credit card data is compromised, it disrupts lives and damages consumer confidence. When trade secrets are stolen, it undercuts American business. A successful attack on our financial system could undermine market confidence and potentially destabilize the global economy. And a cyber attack that crippled our critical infrastructure would have devastating impacts across our entire way of life. We in the national security industry recognize that we have the responsibility to protect ourselves against these cyber threats. But more importantly, we also understand that the U.S. government has a much broader, all-encompassing set of cyber responsibilities and missions that will require tremendous leadership to be successful. We're extremely fortunate to have that tremendous cyber leadership in Admiral Mike Rogers. Admiral Rogers has been clear in his belief that cyber operations is the ultimate team sport and that our collective success will rely on the best efforts of industry, government, and technologists all working collaboratively. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Commander, U.S. Cyber Command, and the Director of the National Security Agency as our speaker tonight. Admiral Rogers is a 33-year Navy veteran. He's a graduate of Auburn University and entered the Navy as an ROTC graduate and surface warfare officer in 1981. In 1986, he was redesignated to cryptology, a specialty that ultimately would enable Admiral Rogers to lead U.S. Cyber Command and NSA as we head into this next era of cyber warfare. Admiral Rogers has extensive Joint Command experience both afloat and ashore, and he's a distinguished graduate of both the National War College and the Naval War College. Please join me in welcoming Admiral Mike Rogers.
Well, good evening. Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me in the back? Excellent. First and foremost, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives to spend a little time together this evening. I got to tell you, to be honest, I am somewhat shocked. When I was asked to do this, I said, "You really want to do an event in D.C. in the middle of August?" I just didn't think there was going to be many people here tonight, so I thank you for your willingness to take time out of your busy lives to spend some time. I'm also grateful because, quite frankly, I am here tonight for several reasons. First and foremost, many of you have heard me previously talk about this as the Director of the National Security Agency, as the Commander of United States Cyber Command. I am a firm believer that public dialogue and transparency is an important part of executing our mission today and in the future. We have got to be willing to have a public dialogue. And so when I was asked if I would be willing to do this, I said no restrictions on media, no restrictions on questions. If we're going to do this, then Rogers has to go into this with his eyes open. Because I think that's important. Because there is no doubt that one of my primary missions as the Director of the National Security Agency is to represent the hardworking men and women of that organization and to help the American public understand who are they, what do they do, and why do they do it. Because quite frankly, we haven't had much discussion about that. Now, the National Security Agency, in simple terms, is tasked to defend the nation and its allies, to comply with the rule of law, and to ensure that we always remain accountable to the American people. That is what we are about. Defending the nation and our allies, following the rule of law, and always remembering that we remain accountable to the citizens that we defend. Much debate about many of the capabilities that have been highlighted about what NSA can do. But what we haven't talked much about is, so what's the context in which those capabilities are applied? What are the policy and the legal mechanisms that have been put in place to ensure those capabilities are not misused against the very citizens that we would defend? What leads us to believe that the things NSA does are in the best interest of the nation and our allies? I took this job in no small part because I believe in the National Security Agency and I believe in its mission. It doesn't mean we're perfect. You will not hear me say that. What you will hear me say is we are committed to the rule of law and we will be accountable. And when we make mistakes, We will stand up and acknowledge that. And we will use the very compliance mechanisms that have been put in place both internally within the agency, but perhaps more importantly, the broader set of external compliance teammates, whether that be the Congress, whether that be the courts, whether that be the Department of Justice, our teammates in the DNI. When we make a mistake, we will acknowledge it. And in fact, much of what you have read has flowed from NSA self-reporting, where we have made mistakes and not properly followed our own procedures. I'd highlight that in the course of the last few months, you have seen multiple public reviews of what NSA does, for example, in compliance with FISA Act 702, in the 215 section of the FISA, by external organizations who have looked at us, said, hey, NSA is complying with the law. NSA has a robust set of mechanisms in place to ensure that we don't abuse the information that we collect and that we appropriately protect it. Doesn't mean we're perfect, but I am very proud of what we have put in place, in no small part because we have learned from our past mistakes. We implemented a pretty extensive compliance organization back in the 2009 timeframe because we realized we need to do things better. I compliment General Alexander, my predecessor, for his commitment to that idea of compliance and oversight. To do our mission, we have to do that. There's much debate, and it's a good one for us as a nation, to talk about what's the right balance between the need to ensure our security and the need to ensure a recognition of the rights of every one of our citizens. And it's not either or. We have got to address both very valid concerns. The harder challenge to me in some ways is what's the right balance between secrecy and transparency? And that's the challenge for me as an intelligence professional. I literally, if I'm honest, I've spent my whole life thinking about how do I protect sources and methods? How do I ensure that what we do is not compromised and our ability to continue to do it in the defense of the nation remains intact? I realize that as an intelligence leader in the 21st century, Rogers, you gotta be willing to talk to a broader set of people, and you gotta be willing to talk, at least in broad terms, about what we do and why we do it. And I am very comfortable with what NSA does and why it does it. Because I believe we defend the nation and its allies, we follow the rule of law, and we always remember that we remain accountable to the American people. That accountability comes in many forms, whether it's the Congress that executes oversight of our functions, whether it's the court that grants us the authority in many cases to do what we do. I mean, we have to make a case, in many cases, to a federal court and get permission to do what we do. And nobody writes us a blank check. We're given permission for a finite purpose for a finite period of time. And if we want to continue beyond that period of time, we got to go back to the court and we got to make that case again. And when we make mistakes, we got to make sure that we report to the court if we have failed in our compliance responsibilities. Now, the other challenge I have as a director of NSA is, as I tell the organization as the new director, we cannot be trapped by the past. We got to learn from the past and we got to drive. We got a mission that the nation depends on. In almost every major operation that I can think of that we as a nation have done in the course of the last year, for example, NSA and many other elements of the intelligence community have played a major role in our ability to do that. That is a good thing for the citizens of this country, and it is a good thing for our allies. And don't ever forget, we are not only about supporting the United States, but we are also about supporting our allies. And I spend a good deal of my time as their director, as does the DNI, ensuring that those partnerships remain focused on the future and about remembering what brought us together in the first place. So my challenge is, how do I make sure that NSA remains effective in executing its mission? How do I make sure that we're positioned as the world around us is changing to make sure that we retain our relevance and our capabilities, always mindful that we obey the rule of law and we are accountable to the citizens of the nation we defend. And then what do we need to be doing now that if we don't do, in 5 to 10 years, we're going to be in real trouble? Because another area that I would give General Alexander great marks in is I was always impressed early in his time as the director. I can remember talking to him about him telling me, so what are some of the investments we need to make now that won't even be a factor for 5 to 10 years? But Mike, if we don't do it now, whoever comes behind me is going to have challenges. That's hard. And it's hard to do it in an environment in which the budget pressure is increasing, not decreasing. We've enjoyed relatively steady increases in funding over the course of the last decade. That's a reflection in large part of the strategic situation we have found ourselves in as a nation and the 2 wars we have fought, in which many of our countrymen made the ultimate sacrifice and came back from that fundamentally changed. And they not only sacrificed in many cases their lives, but they became fundamentally different individuals. And I think about them all the time. And as we move into the future, I'm constantly thinking to myself, what do we need to make sure that we remain relevant to those men and women that are deployed around the world, whether they be wearing a uniform, whether they be working at an embassy somewhere, or whether they be average citizens traveling the world who sometimes find themselves in very dangerous circumstances in bad situations. And we're here to try to help make a difference in all of those scenarios. That is nothing to apologize for. And when we do it, we always remember we obey the rule of law and we're accountable to the citizens of this nation. And every review that we have had to date has come back and said, hey, look, you can argue, is the law correct? You can argue, is the policy what we need to be doing? But nobody has come back and said NSA has failed to follow the law, or NSA is failing to meet its obligations in ensuring that we protect the information that we collect in the course of our duties. Again, it doesn't mean we're perfect, but I fundamentally believe in what we do. I fundamentally believe in how we do it and why we do it. If you are a current employee of NSA or you were an employee before, will you stand for a minute? Come on, I know there's some of you here. The reason I ask you to stand is Rogers gets all the attention as the director. But what really matters to me are men and women like this who have dedicated their adult lives in many cases to trying to ensure the defense of our citizens and those of our allies. I just want to say thank you very, very much. Now, as I think to myself about how we build that future, partnerships are incredibly important to the future. I have always agreed with General Clapper. The future to me is about integration and about maximizing partnerships. That's another reason why I'm here tonight, because I want to be very public in saying I need the help and the capability that many of you in this room and others around the world bring to bear. We can't do this alone. Well, I wish I could tell you that this is the 1960s and it's like the Apollo space program and the US government is the driver of technology. That is just not the scenario we find ourselves in the 21st century, and I don't see that changing. NSA needs good partners. Because remember, NSA has 2 primary missions. The foreign intelligence mission to gain insights about the world around us, about nations who would like to gain an advantage over us, groups that if they had their way, literally every one of us would be dead. We don't think about that much in the society we live in. Think about what we take for granted. A stable society in which the rule of law is respected and the rights of individuals are codified in law and are practiced as a society. We've been blessed with that for 238 plus years. And we take it for granted. You go around the world today, and it just flat out doesn't exist in many other places. And there are groups and individuals who, if they had their way, the entire idea of the inherent right of the individual to make choices in their lives would not exist. There are groups and individuals who believe everything we stand for as a nation is diametrically opposed to their view of the world, and the only way their view of the world can triumph is if we aren't here anymore. Now, I'm not someone who jumps up and down and says, see how terrible the world is. But I am somewhat amazed at times by people who act as if we have no significant challenges out there. We have been fortunate as a nation that since September of 2001, we have managed to forestall foreign terrorists on U.S. soil. We've had some domestic issues, but we have been able to foil those external to the United States who would attempt to recreate in some form the events of 9/11, where we lost almost 3,000 men and women, citizens from around the world, not just U.S. citizens, people from around the world whose only mistake was they picked a particular day to go to work in an office building, or they picked a particular day to do business in an office building, or they went to work at the Pentagon, or they were on the wrong aircraft. And almost 3,000 of them lost their lives. The individuals who perpetrated that remain out there, and like-minded individuals remain out there. We need to remember that. Now, as I said, it's all about finding that balance. It's not either or. Because if the price of achieving our security is fundamentally becoming something we aren't, then they have won. And I have no desire to fundamentally compromise the rights that are at the heart of what is America. And as the NSA director, I am always mindful of those rights. And I am always mindful of what makes America, America. And I am always mindful of the values of our allies and our partners. We aren't in this alone. And as I said, I need your help. I need strong partners. The men and women of the National Security Agency need strong partners. And you got to see some of them here with us tonight. Let me conclude, because I want you guys to get something to eat. We're going to have a session after dinner where I'll take questions and answers, and we'll take it from there. But let me just conclude again by saying I want to thank you for being here tonight. I thank you for your willingness to be part of a dialogue, because we need a dialogue. As a nation, we got to make some tough choices. And we want to have a well-informed dialogue when we make those choices. And we've got to realize that there's a wide range of opinions out there. I understand that. But the dialogue has got to represent multiple viewpoints. That is at its heart what is the strength of America. The idea that we can bring together lots of individuals with lots of different viewpoints, and yet we can still remain who we are and what we are about. And that is what makes me so proud to be the director of the National Security Agency, because I believe in its mission and I believe in its men and women. And I am proud to stand up and say that I am the director. And I am proud to stand up and say that I am a member of the NSA team. And I will not apologize for that to anyone. I thank you very, very much for your time. Have a great dinner, and I look forward to the question and answer. Thanks very much.
So before you dive into what we hope will be a pretty good dinner, I want to say thank you again, Admiral Rogers. I was fortunate, along with Joe, to attend Lieutenant General Mike Flynn's retirement last week, over which Admiral Rogers officiated, and at which he delivered an impassioned, detailed tribute to Mike Flynn without a single note. I think you just witnessed something like that again. And so, Admiral Rogers, we are grateful for your leadership, for what you bring to the intelligence community, and I think we're all fortunate to have you amongst us. Thank you. But the easiest part of the evening for me is to introduce, and not introduce much, but the incomparable Terry Roberts and the amazing Admiral Rogers.
So, can you hear me okay? Great. So welcome to my living room. This is a nice little intimate chat that we're going to have this evening. I have, a few questions that actually I received from across the INSA leadership, so I'm going to start out with those. But I'm really hoping that you're going to send cards and letters. Some of you have sent some cards and letters already, but they're like 2 pages long. So help me out and keep them nice and brief and punchy, and we're going to try to get through as many as we can. So welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.
First of all, I want to thank you for continuing to do your engagement in unclassified environments so that we can actually have conversations, meaningful conversations with the public. So some of you may not know, but Mike Rogers did his first session, unclassified session, with me back in 2011 when he was the Joint Staff J2.
Yep.
So this is not something that he's just doing because now he's the director of NSA or CYBERCOM. So this is a continuation of something he's been doing for a long time. So I was reading an article recently that the NATO summit is
Really?
in
Nobody talks about us in articles.
a NATO summit in 2 weeks, and that they're going, one of the items on the agenda is the cyber defense policy. And so I don't know if you or in your team, how directly involved you are, but what do you think some of the key points of a cyber defense policy from a commander cybercom perspective should be vis-a-vis some of our closest allies in NATO?
Jack. First, before I answer the question, again, thank you all very much for hanging around. I got to tell you, it's after 2100, and I'm sitting in a beautiful, comfy chair, and part of me is going, oh, man. So I'm going to stay strong. So we're talking about what do I think might be the elements of a cyber defense policy. So the first thing I think that it's important is a recognition that cyber defense is not something that just one single entity is going to do. That in order to be successful in this area, it's about creating those partnerships I talked about. It's about how do we harness both the capability resident within the Department of Defense, the broader US government, and within the civil and commercial sectors. So one of the comments I always make within our own department is we were trying to figure out, so what should the vision of the cyber defensive world be in the future is to remind everybody, number one, it's about partnerships. Number two, it's about how do we enable those partnerships to share information in a way that we're trying to do right now, but quite frankly, we're not where we need to be and we're not where we want to be. As U.S. Cyber Command, the direction that I have is upon order from the President or the Secretary of Defense, not only do I do our day-to-day Department of Defense things, but the U.S. Cyber Command mission is on order from the President or the Secretary. Be prepared to provide assistance in the defense of critical infrastructure in the United States. To do that, U.S. Cyber Command can't do it alone. The Department of Defense can't do it alone. We need strong partners, and that partnership has to include information sharing both ways, because I'm quick to remind people, if I put on my NSA hat, NSA, under that information assurance mission I talked about, has an important set of capabilities to help the government, and by extension, the civil sector, and particularly in the critical infrastructure arena, in providing core defensive capability. The challenge for me is I'm not in those critical infrastructure networks, nor would you necessarily want me in those networks. I want to create partnerships where the people that operate those networks are in a position where they can share information with us, and I, in turn, can share information with them. Hey, here's what I'm seeing in that red battle space. Here's what I think is going to come at you. These are the TTPs, I think, the tactics, techniques, and procedures you're going to have to be able to defeat. Here's how I think nation states, individuals, groups are going to come at you. These are the things I think you need to look for. That's only one part of what it takes to create a good defensive structure. It's that two-way dialogue. So great, I've told you what I think you're going to see. Tell me what you're actually seeing. What are you experiencing on your network? What are the conditions that you're seeing that I don't see, because I'm not monitoring your networks? I'm interested in taking a look at what are some of those nation states, groups, and individuals doing. I need that partnership to make this work. So when talking to our NATO allies as a member of the alliance, one of the things we always try to highlight is this is about ultimately, cyber to me, as I think you heard from Chuck, one of my takeaways after 4 months in this job, but quite frankly, having done cyber on and off for the last decade, Cyber, to me, is the ultimate team sport. And if there's anybody who thinks one group has all the answers, if there's anybody who thinks that there's one silver bullet technology that is just going to defend everything, I don't believe it. That's not my experience. I could well be wrong, but my experience leads me to believe that's probably not the answer.
Okay. So I'm going to keep on the international theme for a little while. Can you discuss how we are working, or meaning the royal we, how you are working with Director Clapper and the rest of the national security team to build back trust with our allies and international trust in U.S. companies?
Jack. So the first thing I would say is for the majority of our foreign partners, we don't have a trust deficit. But I will say clearly there are some who have some very real concerns. Collectively, we are attempting to ensure that we maintain an active dialogue with our foreign teammates, that we each realize, quite frankly, we need each other. Those partnerships you keep hearing me talk about, among those relationships, among those partnerships, are the partnerships we have with key allies and friends overseas. I need them and they need us. And this is a two-way street. And to make the relationships work, we each have to acknowledge that each of us have to get something out of it. Even though we have to also acknowledge at times we'll have different viewpoints, we'll come to different conclusions. But with your true friends and allies, it's amazing what you can work through. And there is no doubt in my mind that even as we work through some of these challenges, that in the long run, all of us remember that ultimately, it goes back to my comments before dinner, where I talk about it is about defending our citizens and the nation and defending our allies, and that we need each other to do that. And I don't care if you're sitting in Europe somewhere, if you're in Asia, if you're in South America, I welcome partnerships. And I also ask my partners, what can NSA do to support you? Not just, hey, here's what I need you to do for us. That's not a partnership. That's not a true relationship. That's not what I'm interested in if I can avoid it. I really want a partnership, acknowledging that there are times where we're going to have a difference of opinion. And I don't think any less of my partners, because at times they have a difference of opinion. All I ask is we got to keep talking to each other, and we've got to work through this.
So you're over the first 100 days.
There you go.
Right about now, you should be starting to have a sense of what your top priorities are for NSA and what your top priorities are for CYBERCOM. Can you go over those?
That or I'm writing my retirement speech.
Well, we want to know your stretch goals.
There you go. So, my number one goal as the commander of the United States Cyber Command is to create the cyber mission force that the department is committed to. My view is, so if you ask me, Rogers, what do you think your legacy is going to be as U.S. Cyber Command? I would say during my tenure as a commander, we created and operationalized the cyber mission force for the Department of Defense. We enabled the strong foundational partnerships that are going to build success over long term. And we created a long-standing foundation where cyber is considered a very normal operation, not something specialized, unique that, hey, a bunch of geeks do at Fort Meade, that, hey, look, cyber and the ability to operate and defend in the digital world that we're living in, and I think we're likely to live in for the rest of our lives anyway, you have got to be able to operate in this kind of environment. I try to tell operational commanders, look, you have to own this problem set. We're way past the day where you can turn to your SIX, your communicator, or your chief information officer and say, you know all this cyber network stuff, go do good stuff. And you just let me know when you fixed it all. That ain't gonna work. As a commander, you gotta understand the risk you're taking. You gotta understand how those networks and how that cyber capability helps enable your broader operational vision and the end states you're trying to achieve. And you gotta understand where you're taking risk. Because in the end, it is all about risk. On the NSA side of the house, a couple things. First and foremost, it's making sure the workforce understands we have a mission that is critical to the defense of this nation and its allies. And we have got to execute that mission. And we can't do it with our head down, thinking, woe is me. We got to get our head up, we got to focus on the mission, and we always got to remember, it's about following the rule of law and ensuring accountability. As long as we do that, we don't cut any corners, we stay focused on what we're about, we're going to be fine. So that's probably priority number one for me. The second priority is making sure that even as we have lost capability because of the compromises, I need to make sure that we can regenerate that capability. And the third thing really is, what do we got to do, as you heard me say in my opening remarks? So what do we need to do right now that isn't going to pay off for 5 to 10 years? But if we don't do it in 5 to 10 years, our reliefs, our successors are going to be going, what in the heck did Rogers and those guys do? Because I believe you can see the future coming. And I know there's some things that we got to do a little differently and some investments that we have to make, partnering with our broader intelligence community partners, because we always try to remember we are part of a bigger team and that we are just one element of the intelligence community, and that it's amazing what we can do when we think about integration and working together as a team. I am honored to partner with John Brennan at CIA, with Tish Long at NGA, and our road DIA. It is amazing what we do when we create strong integrated partnerships. And I think that's the future in the intelligence profession.
Okay. So we have something going on at INSA that we call the IC imperatives. And in my own words, it's sort of taking stock of the national security arena in the digital age, and how do you maintain relevance and impact in the digital age, and actually providing that extra so what. So some of us, myself included, believe that maybe it might be a time when the paradigm is shifting from us starting with sensitive sources and methods and then seeing what else is out there in the open source or unclassified arena, and perhaps start with unclassified data, analytics, insights, information, and then focus sensitive sources and methods on the gaps. Is that a culture shift that you're thinking about? And if it isn't, you know, how are you approaching the digital age and the impact to mission?
The first comment I want to make is, and I could be misunderstanding what you just told me, so Terry, if I got it wrong, you just tell me.
Sure.
I'm always leery at times about when I listen to people, and I'm going, well, you sound to me as if you're characterizing this, it's a one versus the other.
No, right.
One of the projects that we're working on out at Fort Meade right now is how do you do signals intelligence in an unclassed environment?
I'm sorry.
How do you do signals intelligence in an unclassed environment?
Right.
I think that's a real
Right.
growth area for us. We are, and it is a big cultural issue for us.
Okay.
Hey, so how are you going to do SIGINT working in a wireless environment with unclassified connections around you in a way that we're not used to? When we normally do this, hey, we do everything in an SCI, kind of high, very secure level. We totally separate the unclassed world. We go to a different place many times. The vision for us in the future is how do we bring these two arenas together so that you can work them both simultaneously, rather than a linear, hey, I do one and I do the other. Whether it's, hey, I start off unclassified or I start off at the SCI highly classified level. The vision I think we have of the future is how do we provide our analysts and our workforce simultaneous access to both? And how do we train them about how do you use both sets of capabilities to generate insight? It is amazing, and I'll be honest, the ones who have the challenge with this, it ain't the young members of our workforce. They look at us and go, well, this is the way I live my life. This is what I do at home. What's the big deal? It's generally the people like me who've been around a while who are, but part of me goes, look, there's clearly technical challenges, but I think we can mitigate those. There's clearly risk, but we want to go into it with our eyes open, but I think it's the future. We have got to bring these two together. It's not either or. And living in the digital world that we're living in now, it just, as a SIGINT officer, it just excites the heck out of me. There's great opportunity out there. And I don't mean for nefarious purposes. There are great opportunities out there to generate greater insights to help defend this nation and those of our key allies. Technology is also a vehicle that's going to help us with that compliance, rule of law, and accountability piece. That's opportunity for us. It's not a risk. I mean, it's a risk, I guess, but it's not a threat. It's an opportunity.
Okay. So you were talking about the millennials. You have two of them, and I have two of them.
That's right.
You know, there are real challenges to recruiting, retaining, enabling them in the national security arena, and having, as you're talking about the cyber force, the right skill set mix. You might not be able to do it with military only. You might have to have civilian integrated it there, or you might have to have new ways of integrating contractor support. So there's sort of a dynamic that's going on about manpower in general. What's your thinking on how you're approaching it?
For me, again, I make the same comment. It isn't either or. You need both. The key components for us are, in no particular order, contractors remain a key part of the future for us. I don't see that changing. Civilians, core aspect. If you look at the SIGINT workforce for us at the National Security Agency, we have more civilians than uniforms. And then the uniform piece, both active and reserve. We have got to create a structure that harnesses the capabilities of all of those. And the biggest thing that I am interested in trying to do as the director of NSA is, how do we create mechanisms, particularly given the technical focus of our mission set, how do we create mechanisms and structure that will enable our workforce to work with us, to go work on the outside, whether it's out in Silicon Valley or other technology elements, to potentially come back. This idea, for the future, Mike Rogers' opinion, I am always amazed by the amount of people I talk to in our workforce, and many of your NSA shipmates that are here tonight will tell you if you meet Admiral Rogers at work, he always says, okay, so you gotta start by telling me about you. And one of the things they'll always ask is, so tell me how long you've been with us, and tell me what brought you to us in the first place. I am always amazed. I routinely meet people who have been with us 30, 35 years. I just did I'm gonna do a session next week with an employee, a young lady who's been with us for 50 years.
I'm glad you said young.
And one of the things I talk to the leadership about is, hey, that has a lot of positives to it. But the flip side is, if we're not careful, we're gonna be a very insular organization. So what do we do to create a more permeable membrane that will enable us to bring people in and out? Hey, I want long-term NSA employees to get experience working in the industry and in the corporate sector. I want them to understand what shapes the corporate sector, what drives technical investments, what are the cutting-edge technologies that are working in R&D, and that if you're a venture capitalist, you're willing to bet on right now. I'm a bit surprised. I try to spend time with venture capitalists. I never thought as a naval officer I would be doing that. Why? I said to the workforce, venture capitalists are one of the best INW indicators you got out there. Why? They're willing to invest money on what they think will be the technology that 5 years from now will form a baseline. They invest because they think it offers monetary return. Hey, I'm interested because I want to understand the technology that is going to be out there 5 years from now. Again, that thought about what are the investments that we need to be making now. So I just think we've got to create a workforce where you can move back and forth. I'm in the process of figuring out, so how do we go to the corporate sector, for example, and say, how'd you like to do some internships at NSA? You want to send some people to work with us, 2, 3 years? I can put them to good use. I can show them what we do. They'll need to meet our security requirements. They'll have to sign a non-disclosure agreement because what we do is sensitive. But I want them to understand what we do. And this will help us in those partnerships. Because one of the challenges for us in the corporate sector, in my experience, is we do not understand each other well and we don't know each other well. I'd like to see what we can do to try to change that. I need to understand what shapes the corporate world. What are the things that many of you are concerned about? What shapes your worldview? What concerns you? What is it about NSA that you want to make sure you get a better understanding of? That based on everything you know, you'd say to yourself, boy, I'm a little uncomfortable. I want to have that dialogue because I want people to form their opinions from fact and not conjecture and not from a one-side view of the world. And in the end, they got to make up their mind as to what they're comfortable with. I understand that. So
let me poke at that a little bit. We, the royal we, hear a lot of government seniors talk about new kinds of partnerships and new kinds of relationships with industry and academia. But we really don't see a lot of new mechanisms put in place. And I'm not talking about the acquisition process. I'm talking about the ability to have those open vetting and sharing of ideas and getting folks within government who are articulating requirements, right, to have those insights. Is there any part of your plan that's about how you put those new partnerships in place?
So what I have done is tasked the team and said, okay, Rogers sets the left and right limits and the broader strategic vision. But Rogers is not the guy who's going to sit here and say, and here's every step we're going to take to do it. Hey, workforce, you're the men and women who have been doing this for a long time. You have great insights. So what I've done is provided the leadership team with a series of tasks. This is one of them, in which I've said, hey, you're going to come back to me in the fall and you're going to tell me how we're going to do this.
Okay.
Because we got great partnerships with DNI. We got great partnerships with the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. If you look in the last 6 months, for example, we have been granted authorities to change pay scale for some of the technical fields where we're concerned about recruiting and retention. We approached our USDI and our DNI partners and we said, look, I think we need to do things a little bit differently. Here's the authorities that we would ask of you. It's great to see them come back and say, okay, we think you've made a case, we'll grant you the authority to do that. And that has been very positive in the workforce because much of the workforce tells us, hey, we love what we do and we want to stay with you, but boy, I could make a whole lot more money on the outside. I could work a whole less hours. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have my neighbors looking at me going, so you work at NSA? Can we trust you? I mean, one of the reasons why I had those men and women stand up tonight is because NSA is about men and women. It's about motivated people who want to make a difference, not who go to work every day thinking about, you know, today I'm just going to indiscriminately collect against people I have no clue who they are. Or, you know, today I just want to abuse the authority that's been given to us. Or, you know, I could harness this technology to do some neat things that have nothing to do with my mission. That is not what motivates those men and women out at Fort Meade and in the broader enterprise we run around the world. They want to make a difference. They want to do the right thing for the right reasons. And they are energized by the fact that they tell themselves, hey, I go home every night thinking to myself, I'm trying to keep America safe, and I'm trying to keep our allies safe, and I'm trying to do it in the right way. They're not perfect, but they're just like you. They're not some sort of techno geek who has no clue what's going on in the world around them and who doesn't think about the world around them. I'm honored to work with them.
So I have quite a few questions about, so I'm going to roll them into one, about CYBERCOM. And it's really about, you know, CYBERCOM sort of getting itself established.
And that is water, if I could, that is water.
I thought it was, but never mind. It's been getting established. They're putting the relationships in place with the services. You have the cyber force now coming online. But where is CYBERCOM fitting between the lines of authority, acquisition, capability, man, train, and equip roles vis-a-vis the services? And since you've been both,
right, now
I think you get
worlds.
that.
You know, clearly under the current construct, the point I make is U.S. Cyber Command sets the standards, if you will, that says this is what the workforce will look like, these are the skills it will have, and these are the training standards it must meet. I and the broader U.S. Cyber Command team provide that to the services. And the services are tasked with the responsibility to generate capacity and generate capability. U.S. Cyber Command, in broad terms, we do have some authority, but in broad terms, under the current construct, U.S. Cyber Command does not focus on acquisition. I don't buy or generate capability. I state operational requirements as an operational commander, but I don't go out and design them. I don't go out and buy them. That's what services do. And I say that as a guy who just finished 2.5 years as the Navy component commander for both cyber and SIGINT to NSA. Much discussion about, hey, is that the right long-term view? Do we need to change that? Is there a SOCOM model that we want to look at? We'll work our way through that. I just sat down today, as a matter of fact, and spent about an hour and a half with all of the service components, and the question I posed to the team was, so I think we're coming up on about halfway through this cyber mission build. We've got a good vision for the future. We've got a good set of standards. I think we've got a broad operational concept. How are we going to generate true combat readiness? I said, to me, it's like a ship. Take a carrier. We spend, notionally 8 years or so building it. The day it's commissioned, contractor turns it over to the United States Navy. We have a beautiful ceremony, and on that day, we certify that everything on that ship works as designed. Contractors met their obligations. Crew's manned at 100% or as close to it as we can. And every member of that crew has achieved basic qualifications that enable that ship to operate safely at sea. And yet, we then spend an additional, depending on where they are in their schedule, 12 to 24 months to actually train that carrier up so it's actually ready to deploy in a combat environment in a tough, demanding operational arena. Cyber's no different. What I talked to the team earlier today was about, so how are we going to do that? We've focused on commissioning the teams. That's great. But that doesn't get to operational capability, and that doesn't get to warfighting skill. And that's what we need, and that's what the department and the nation is counting on for us. So we're spending a lot of time focused on that, and hey, the services are key partners in that. It isn't just going to be U.S. Cyber Command.
So as you can imagine, we have a few questions related to Snowden. But I think this one encapsulates it the best. So many elements of government media and the public seem to be displaying an anti-NSA sentiment. How do you get the public to understand that NSA's clearly mandated legal roles and responsibilities and its commitment to ensure? You talked about that at a high level.
Right.
Are there some specific things that you and your team are doing, especially with the new onslaught of article today that came out through?
I don't know. I haven't, to be honest with you, I was so
Through
busy.
Wired.
I was so
Through
busy
Wired.
working, I haven't read anything today.
Don't worry, your staff will have it all outlined for you tomorrow.
When I come in tomorrow morning at 06, there I will be. Hey, sir.
So in other words, how are you dealing with whatever continues to come?
So I think there's a couple things. First, I'm quick to remind the organization, look, this is not what is going to define us, and I am not going to spend my time focused on this. What we need to do is focus on the mission and doing the right thing for the right reasons the right way. Defend the nation and our allies, follow the rule of law, and always remember that we're accountable to the citizens of the United States. Hey, keep that in mind, always remember that, and we're going to be fine. The second thing that I'd say as a component as I think about, how do we address this knowledge deficit, and you could argue a trust deficit in some ways among some. I think among the components are, so if you've looked, we have probably declassified, partnering with DNI and others, we've probably declassified more stuff in the last 90 days than I can remember as a professional SIGINT officer almost in my entire career. Because we're trying to ask ourselves, so what can we do to help ensure that the nation has a sense for what we do and why? And that is, and I say, look, you got to be willing to do it, warts and all. As I said, there are some times we get it wrong. And when we get it wrong, we are going to report that. And we've got to be willing to acknowledge that. We are not perfect. But nobody is trying to systematically undermine the rights of our citizens or trying to systematically bypass the laws that we are required to execute. So to do that, I think we're looking at disclosing in a very public way more information than we've ever done before. Trying to engage in a broader public dialogue. Tonight is an example of that. Hey, so there's media here. Fine, they need to be here. Hey, I'm not screening questions. You need to ask what the audience has in mind, and we'll take it from there. Another point I try to make is, but it just can't be about NSA, defending NSA. That's a loser to me. It needs to be part of a broader dialogue. And we are very fortunate that we have some great partners out there who are willing to stand up and have that dialogue. Because I'm the first to admit, if it's just going to be about NSA talking about NSA, we're missing the boat, from my perspective anyway. NSA needs to be a part of this dialogue, but it needs to be much broader. People need to understand, hey, look, there is a legal framework in position out there. We just don't unilaterally decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. We have a set of policy mechanisms that help shape what NSA focuses its foreign intelligence mission on. We have a set of court-directed compliance requirements where we have to make a case in many cases to get the authority or permission to do what we do. We have regular congressional oversight where we have to notify and I have to testify. I have to notify in writing and testify publicly as well as privately before our primary oversight committees. You know, part of the challenge in all this is, if we're honest with each other, the mechanisms of governance within our nation right now do not enjoy broad trust and confidence among many elements of our citizenry. That's a tough thing to acknowledge. It doesn't help us as a nation that that's the case, but it is the case. And so one thing I try to tell the team out at Fort Meade is, I am not going to waste my time wishing the world was a certain way. We're going to acknowledge the way the world is. We're going to make sure we understand the context in which we operate. And we're going to be effective in doing that. And we just have to acknowledge that this is part of this challenge. Much of what we structured initially, if you go back historically for us, was we ensured Congress, as the elected representatives of the citizens of this nation, were among the primary tools to ensure NSA's compliance. And yet we find ourselves in a situation where much of our public doesn't trust many elements or has low confidence in many elements of our government. So what do you do when your compliance strategy was founded on that approach? We've got to broaden this a little bit. So that's one of the reasons why you find me here tonight. And hopefully you're going to see some things over the course of the next few months where we're trying to have a dialogue. I'm not out here to sell anything. I'm not out here to necessarily convince anybody. What I've told the team is stick to the facts and let people make well-informed decisions as to what they are comfortable with. That's what we need to do. We need to focus on the mission and stick to the facts.
One last quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Those of us who support and have worked with both the Fort Meade area and DHS have sensed a tension over the years in roles and missions related to the cyber arena. So what is the partnership that you have in place or are putting in place with DHS?
Well, I would tell you, for me, I'm very fortunate. I partner with a cabinet secretary in the form of Jay Johnson, who I have worked with before in my career. And I love the fact it is just, Jay will just pick up the phone and talk to Rogers, and Rogers will just pick up the phone and talk to Secretary Johnson about, hey, I think we need to do this, I think we need to do that. He and I, we meet regularly. We have talked to our teams about what we need to do to create stronger partnerships. You know, what I have argued is NSA and US Cyber Command bring great capability to the cyber mission set. But we have got to do this in a partnership with others. And in the federal government, probably our two biggest partners are DHS and the FBI. And that's the way it's going to be. That's what we need to do. I am not about control, as the team at Fort Meade has to hear me say. It is not about control, it's about outcomes. I don't care who gets the credit. I am willing to provide manpower and capability to support others, and I don't care if they get the credit. This is about helping to defend America and its allies. It's about providing a capability for the greater good. That's what we're doing in the cyber arena. And NSA needs to do that as part of a broader partnership. And I would only highlight, from my perspective, I love our partnership with DHS. We are way past, I can remember 2-3 years ago, arguments about who ought to do what. My comment to Jay is, Jay, this is an opportunity. We're both new in our jobs. As far as I'm concerned, we've made the decision. We got a vision. Let's execute. Let's drive. I'm no longer interested in what I consider to be mindless debates about who ought to do what. Mindless is too strong a characterization. I apologize. But again, I am not interested in control. I'm interested in outcomes. That's what matters to me.
You can come to my living room anytime.
Yes, ma'am. There you go. There you go.
Let me say this. Thank you, Admiral Rogers.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Great. This is great. Your presentation, your Q&A is very great. I had the honor of sitting on the table with the Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper. Director Clapper wanted to come up and personally.
All right.
Thanks, Joe. Well, listen, I know this is school night. It is for me, so I'll be brief. About 5 years ago, I did one of these with Joan Dempsey. And one of the things I labored over was, what do you do with your legs? You cross them?
You put them this way.
So I was watching for that. Secondly, I do want to thank INSA and particularly the corporate sponsors, because evenings like this wouldn't happen without the support of the corporate sponsors. So thank you. So Mike Rogers is a testament to the system that we have in the United States for grooming leaders. And no one else on the planet can compete with that. And Mike's passion for the mission, for all of his missions, whether as DERNSA or as Commander CYBERCOM, I think you'd agree with me, is manifest. So, you know, hats off to Mike Rogers.
Thanks, sir.
And I have to do this as a commercial, but as you heard, and you know, I wouldn't have blessed this if you weren't an advocate for integration. So Mike, thanks for that. Great job.
One team, one team.
Sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Terry, Admiral Rogers, your leadership of NSA, the Cyber Command CSS, we thank you.
Okay.
We appreciate that. One plug also on INSA on the 18th and 19th of September. We will be having a summit. We're partnering with FC. It's going to be a great event, over 70 speakers.
And there's a
lot of
cyber
issues.
track.
And a cyber track for Terry. So please look at our website, sign up, FC INSA website, join us that day. Admiral Rogers, thank you so for your leadership. Thank you all.
Thank you.